This morning's talk is liberation from the personal ego. I'd like to start with the same statement that we're going to end with. So it can be like a seed thought for you to think about through the talk this morning. And this is it. Christ said, "Those who lose themselves, they are those who can discover themselves." Okay, I'm going to repeat this. Christ said, "Those who lose themselves are those who can discover themselves." I'm going to share two quotes with you. One is from Supermundane 45, and the second quote is from Supermundane 82. If you hear nothing more or remember nothing more than these two quotes, I will applaud you, because they're powerful statements, they're experiential statements, and they relate to probably 80% of the world, 80% of humanity today. The first one is this. This is one from Supermundane 45. "Not one of the teachers has ever proclaimed egotism and greed for mankind. It is not from light that such vipers are born." Now the second one, a little longer. "Urasvati knows how unexpectedly great manifestations can occur. Thus, she has seen the strata of the subtle world, not in her subtle body, but with her physical eyes, with her eyes open and fully awake. She has seen the crowding in the subtle world and was astonished that these crowds roamed idly with no work to do. True, she was shown the stratum of the subtle world, which especially concerns us. In it were seen the contemporary clothes that reinforce an earthly way of thinking. And people crowded together as in the square of any modern town. We are greatly saddened that such crowds are the least accessible for evolution. It can be observed that their thinking is so egocentric that they cannot see beyond their own crowded and motionless circle. They contaminate each other, and, as on earth, fail to look up. Urasvati can attest to how densely crowded these strata are. And let me add this. When your eyes are awake, when you can physically see this subtle world and the crowds that are buried there, it is so shocking and so painful to see, because these beautiful souls are trapped in a tomb. The strata that these lost souls are crowded in perhaps is what the Bible calls hell. I'm not sure, but it is hell, what we would, define as hell. The colors are basically colorless. It is like the sun hasn't shone for decades. It's like dust covers the buildings and people. There's no joy. And yet they think this is their life. And this is why we who have at least a sense of wanting to climb out of our present life while we are here physically really, really need to take this morning's talk to heart, to be courageous enough to see your personal ego and to make a commitment to your soul and to your future and to your solar angel that I want to take the rest of the days of my life, release my little self from this strongly held ego that's controlling my life so that I can evolve. If you've read, and I'm sure most of you have read at least in part, The Secret Doctrine and some of the other teachings of the Ageless Wisdom, you've read about the laggards. You've read about the moon chain. The laggards and those entities that are in that crowded and motionless circle is today's version of the moon chain. They haven't evolved. So all you have to do is see this. Someday you may have that experience. It may be momentary. I hope for you it is momentary because it's horrifying. When you see it, when you see this motionless, crowded circle made of egocentric people crowded together, believe me, you will no longer have an ego. It will evaporate just like that. Because who wants to stay in that situation for eternity? Who does? So, we could share ideas, understandings, and concepts and with one another just based on these two quotes. And I'm not going to, I'm going to elaborate a little bit on it, but I do hope you hear this. I hope you hear the talk. I just hope you hear it. Okay. There is an epidemic of sickness spreading all over this world, and it is called the worship of the little self. The teaching names it destructive ego worship. Destructive ego worship. Ego worship is like a big wound in the psyche, and it grows like a cancer, not just with your physical life, but also in the astral world and in the mental world. In time, it manifests in the physical body, and how? Through various diseases. Through various diseases. How do we detect the appearance of such a sickness? How do you know if you, your spouse, your friends, or co-workers have such a sickness? Here are some signs from the teaching. The first one is excessive self-worship. Now, I will tell you, I almost didn't give the talk this morning because I know those who have the strongest egos will say, well, that's not me. She's not talking about me. The irony is those that even have a modicum of humility will say, oh my God, Am I one of those people that have excessive self-worship? Number 2, superiority feeling. I don't think there's really much difference between the two. Excessive self-worship does lead to superiority feeling. So this is why I like to position myself with people that are greater than I am, who are smarter than I am, who are wiser than I am, because it keeps one humble, meaning it makes me recognize how far I have yet to go. And that's a much better place to be in your life, so you're not trapped in that crowd of egocentrical people. And number 3, yours or their minds are filled with such thoughts as, they hurt my interest. They hurt my feelings. They violated my rights. They are responsible for my pain and suffering, my feelings, my beliefs, my opinions. They're sacred to me. I do not want anyone to talk against my feelings and beliefs and opinions. Revenge is the way to deal with people. I will punish them until they agree with my way of thinking. Egotism is a disease that tries to destroy the reputation of people. If you don't believe this, read about those who have tried to destroy the reputation of our great teachers. It's horrifying. Just to share a little example, and it's such a minor example, maybe not even worth talking about, but it's stuck in my mind. Many years ago, Challenge for Discipleship was published, and we were by Torquem Serdarian, and we were all devouring it. In fact, today it is still forms the foundation of the principles and virtues that the White Mountain Educational Organization lives by. And this young man, he wasn't really a good student, and he would come in and out of classes. And finally, I said, look, just take this book. Don't come to classes for a while until you read this book in its entirety. Then come in and tell me what you read. So he was gone for 2 weeks. And then he came in and saw me, and he said, yeah, it was an okay book. He said, but there are certainly a lot of things in that book I didn't agree with. I said, don't ever come back. See, that's the ego. First of all, before you criticize a book, you better write one. Yeah. And then if you've written 3 books, don't criticize someone who has written 125 books that are bestsellers in the spiritual community. Egotism is a disease that tries to destroy the reputation of people to make themselves feel great. They try to stop their careers. They defame them, pull them down into the mud in order to satisfy their own negative emotions, revenge, and hatred. And all this to please their own ego. They reflect exactly what Master instructed Urasvati about such folks, saying their thinking is so egocentric that they cannot see beyond their own crowded and motionless circle. If these people have money or power, they inject their venom into the bones of their victims. They are brainwashed by self-importance and are never, 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 I'll just add another one to that. Oh no, here comes another one. They are never touched by the spirit of forgiveness. I'm saying that because it's like my bottled up experiences with such people. Now I can talk about it. It never occurs to them to sincerely and genuinely say, I'm sorry. Or to sincerely and genuinely take responsibility for trying to destroy the reputation of others, or to defame them in some way. They never have this, you'll never see this spirit of forgiveness in them, or self-forgetfulness, harmlessness, sympathy, feelings of oneness, or the renunciation of self. You will never see this in egotists. Contaminated with egotism, these people never try to help. Listen, this is very interesting. Never try to help those who hurt them. They never try to help those who hurt them, or to cultivate in them compassion and justice and harmlessness. Such thoughts never occur to them. See, they carry it, that anger, that revenge, and so forth. They can't let it go. They are strong. Now, why do you want to let it go? I know somebody had that question. Well, why would you want to help those who have hurt you? You're looking at karmic debt right eyeball to eyeball. Now's the time, see, to dissipate and pay that debt. Even though you don't know the source or the cause of the debt, it's there. So if someone has really desperately hurt you by trying to destroy your reputation, slander you, you're going to say, like Richard was reading in the verse this morning, I see the Christ in them. They are so beautiful. And when we begin to think that way, first, it changes our own consciousness and heals us. And secondly, it diffuses their dynamite, their stick of dynamite. It diffuses that stick of dynamite that is filled with anger and the desire to hurt and harm and defame and to kill off. So that's why we want to cultivate in ourselves and in those who hurt us compassion and justice, sense of justice and harmlessness. But such thoughts never occur to them. See, they are so strongly focused on wanting to destroy either objectively and openly or subtly and covertly, just to build their ego and self-interest. Some of them may succeed in courts. And I've read about this. If you've read some of the history of the followers of Nicholas and Helena Rourke, you know about their enemies and how this one major human being, major in terms of what he contributed and how he worked for the building of the museum, took them to court, won, took all those precious paintings, took everything away, but it did not break the spirit of Nicholas and Helena Rourke. or their followers. Some may succeed in courts or in public opinion, but within their soul they degenerate and decay. Is it worth it? Not to us. It is not worth being entombed. The spiritual path will never open to a person as long as he is not anxious to redeem people who in some way hurt them. The spiritual path will never open as long as one nourishes the spirit of hatred and revenge. There are people who can destroy a nation because someone hurt their feelings. Self-worship is the root of all psychological diseases. Self-worship is the root of all psychological diseases. It is a sickness that grows in the psyche of a person like a malignant tumor. That kind of tumor turns into a sensitive wound that opens and causes suffering every single time. The victim continuously feels that someone is insulting them, hurting them, exploiting them, humiliating them, and so forth. Such people even judge other people by the way they look or they talk. I remember, this is fun, I remember back in the early days I was teaching astrology classes, and we all try to dress the very best we can with our colors and fabric and clothes that we feel comfortable in. And I still do, but I started a long time ago. And this person came up and said, "You have got to stop wearing those colors. Those are not spiritual colors." And I just looked at the person and I said, "You mean that what I wear determines if I'm spiritual or not? Wow, what color should I wear?" That's the Gemini sarcasm that was kind of, winding its way through those words. But it's so true. This is how shallow, people are at times. Sometimes when I find myself having to deal with such people, my own thinking process is just get over yourself. I know that's not, an esoteric phrase, but I think it. It's like, just get over yourself, just move on. So how many times has someone threatened you or hinted that they might take you to court? We've had that several times as a group. But it's bottomless. It was a bottomless threat. They are bottomless threats most of the time. Not always, but most of the time they are. And then we have those in the medical profession who have to increase their patient fees these days because of the high cost of malpractice insurance. You listen to the news today and see how many threats of lawsuits are out there. So much so that prisons are now bursting at the seams. New prisons are having to be built, or criminals are having to be released early due to a lack of space because of cost. Soon everyone will take everybody else to court to get even. Everybody will sue everybody else, and this epidemic will spread to what? To destroy trust and faith and friendship and cooperation, and pump fuel to those who are ready to benefit from such situations. I will never forget the day Torquem told me, Torquem Serdarian, who was my teacher, trust everyone and no one. And boy, did that bug me for the longest time. And now, in my old age, I get it. I understand it. And for example, one of my greatest joys at present is discovering and researching the early years of the Agni Yoga Society, and even prior to the society being organized, to learn about the members and their love for one another and how they work so beautifully together, and they were so excited and devoted, to the teachers and the teaching, until one day they weren't. And I'm not speaking of all of them, because some of them never wavered, ever. But that one miserable son of a gun, I won't mention his name because I don't want to bring that energy here. He was the most devoted, loving, supportive, dedicated student of the teaching and of the teachers. And then one day he took them to court and took all of their money away. Everything. He was a man of power. He was a man of money. But do you think he won? He is now infamous. You can never win when you fight against light and love. You never win. These sick people are those who worship money, possessions, position, and their individual self more than anything else in the world. There are no higher values for them. Now, they may say they have higher values. I don't care what they say. I look at their action. That's what we want to look at. Not what they say, but what they do. These people are, I know this is heavy, but it's so real. It's good to hear. These people are self-centered vampires who, after trying to devour their enemies, they eat their own soul and they disappear in darkness. And they end up crowded together as in a square of any modern town in this subtle world. Christ spoke about unconditional love, and his disciples demonstrated that love how? By risking and sacrificing their own lives for all those who were sinners in various forms. The disciples of Christ did not sacrifice themselves to spread the teaching of Christ, but they sacrificed themselves to demonstrate and teach the power of love. You can see how many these days people are slowly replacing love with hatred, separatism, revenge, and competition. People speak about love, but they hate. Say, I love you until I hate you. They speak about generosity, but they hold on to all that they have. They can try to hurt anyone who does not share their beliefs, see, their doctrines and dogmas, but still speak about saving the world. A world that they let sink into the mud of revenge and loathing. Our bodies are like 3 children who are running the show. Observe them. Observe your 3 children. So you thought you never had kids before? You carry these 3 children around with you all the time. Observe them, but do not identify with them. If you identify with them, you will share their pain and suffering. But if you stand detached, you will be able to know them and to perhaps help them. Your three bodies. As I talked about last Sunday about the science of observation. Remember that what your bodies are going through is the result of what they did in the past to others. This will continue the same way until you detach yourself and gain control over your bodies and their karma. Once you control them, the good news is that this vicious cycle will break, and you will no longer be the slave of your ego. Decentralization of your ego is the key. Mentally empty yourself and do not create a target to receive all arrows upon yourself, but let them go through. People overemphasize their own existence and appraise themselves with such a high price that they give rights to themselves to look at others as trash and as objects of humiliation in every way possible. Whereas if you know yourself as you are, you will neither attract the arrows of karma nor aim arrows of hatred. It is your sense of self-worship, of egotism, that perpetuates suffering for others and for yourself. Your sense of self-worship and of egotism. Your victory is not to take revenge on others, but to help them stand above that animal nature and proceed toward perfection. Negativity cannot be cured by negativity, but only by positivity. Or in an attitude of egolessness. This is what wisdom does. No one can help you as long as you are acting as the central axis for all your problems. No problem can be solved by dealing with the problems, but by standing above them. Occupying yourself with the vision of future plans. You cannot change things that are going on in your life into positive direction until you stand above them. You cannot solve or try to solve problems by creating new problems. See, that's the bottom line. In time, you learn that the key attitude is to withdraw from the level of the problem and look at it from the point of view of the higher level. Withdrawing yourself from problems creates, this is so beautiful, it creates an intensified light within you, which approaches the problem with a more constructive attitude. It may be, because we're still a bit too human, it may be that when someone attacks you, either through a letter or an e-letter or a voicemail, or even in person, that there's a knee-jerk reaction. But the more humility you have, the more sanity you have, the more balance you have, the more sense of equilibrium you have, and you will stop yourself and say, wait a minute. Am I going to let that egocentric person engage me in the same level of thinking as themselves? I don't want to be there. And I sure don't want to be in that horrible, horrible, colorless world in the market of egocentric people. I want to evolve. I don't want to be the next example of the moon chain or a laggard. And that person isn't worth it to me. Instead, you can look at them with compassion and when you have neutralized yourself, then you can bless them and move on. But don't go to bed with them. And what that means. That means don't try to save them. Not until they come to you and say, help me, forgive me, help me. Another approach to deal with such people is to receive advice from your trusted circle of friends. Those who are clear thinking and who have intuition. People cry, panic, and curse in thinking that they are innocent victims. That a great injustice and damage has been done to them, that they must take revenge in any way possible without realizing for a moment that they may be as guilty as those who they believe have hurt them in some way. It is time to raise yourself above your personality and act as a soul. You will decide to do things consciously and with a full sense of responsibility. A personality cannot solve personality problems. It cannot. But a soul can. As long as you are preoccupying yourself with yourself, you have no future. The future starts for you after you cease to act mechanically. Most of our pain and suffering is the result of our ego. We think life revolves around us instead of thinking that we are part of the events, part of life. We attach to things and we give to ourselves such an importance that almost everything that is not agreeable to us irritates us. We do not let things go. We do not forgive. Forgiveness means to let things go. Remember that most actions done in the past were done by your personality vehicles, your gunas. You can examine them and you can think they are right or wrong, but not from the point of view of your ego or for condemnation. Self-forgetfulness, detachment, standing in the idea of voidness or in the idea of nothingness leads you to happiness and joy and to a life of more usefulness. I wish I had more time to talk about this. I don't, but it's something to think about, so I'm going to read it again. Self-forgetfulness, detachment, standing in the idea of voidness or in the idea of nothingness leads you to happiness and joy and to a life of more usefulness. You must not consider yourself the center of the universe. Remember that almost 3/4 of humanity are unhappy, with greater pain and suffering than you have. It is noble to suffer for the world, but it is not noble to forget the suffering of the world, and think that it is only you who suffers. %80 of the suffering of the world is the result of the actions of those people who live as if they are the center of the world. People who live, in other words, they live for themselves. All inclusiveness for the sake of the whole is our destination. All inclusiveness. As long as we are the center of life, we cannot exercise true love, true understanding, and true service. We're going to manipulate and exploit people through our so-called love, our so-called serving and understanding. If the idea of self-forgetfulness was understood and practiced, life would change. As long as there is my exclusive ego, my exclusive family ego, my exclusive racial ego, my exclusive national ego, our human nature will not emerge, as all these egos are inherited from our animal nature. And now I'm going to repeat what we started with. Christ said, those who lose themselves, they are those who can discover themselves. It's so profound. Did you like? If we were on Facebook and we had all those little things, I would not click like, but I'd click love. You know, that little heart. Yeah, because this is not a talk to like, but it is a talk to love, right?